Hey there, this is Santino Pino here with another Bureau of Prisons headline. And this headline comes from theappeal.org. Now, anytime that I'm going to visit or would react or cover a headline from a website that I have never heard before, I'm heading into this story blind, but I also want to check does it lean left or right? Because when you get an article and it leans too far left or too far right, it just becomes an opinion piece. There's not a lot of facts in it. We did one a few days ago. I said we again. I'm gonna stop. I did one a few days ago, and it was just such a far left inflammatory piece that was just about the headline. That's all it was. There was really no story inside of the story. It was just the headline. Like it wasn't a story. And so we're heading into another shock value story post. So you can guess in the comments based on the front page of this website if this is left or right leaning. Um, we got this headline right here, but also uh, a police officer uh, attended the January 6th. I'm going to guess they're talking about January 6th many, many years ago because has there been another January 6th anyways? Um, Incarcerating senior citizens, ICE jail. So a big anti-law enforcement, anti-corrections already take on this. I went to a rating website that was already left-leaning. So there's a lot of rating websites that are left-leaning, and even a left-leaning rating website said this thing is leaning left. So again, let's just go over the article. Let's see how many facts are in it, and we'll go from there. But a judge compares Federal Bureau of Prisons to Soviet GULAG. Okay. In a ruling earlier this month, U.S. Judge Roy B. Dalton blasted the federal prison agency for a pattern of medical neglect after officials ignored his order to schedule an appointment with a specialist for a woman at high risk of breast cancer. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about when it comes to shock value article titles, when it comes to the Bureau of Prisons. Soviet Gulag. All right. First, I'm going to do this live. I haven't done inside a Soviet Gulag. Let's look at some images here. See what a Soviet Gulag looks like. Okay. Here's what I can tell you. There are no facilities in the Bureau of Prisons. There are no contracted facilities. There are no halfway houses. There is no part of the Bureau of Prisons that looks like that. None. Okay. And so this is one of those things again, and it happens on the far left and the far right. Is one of those things like, oh God, I mean, this is what you should be picturing, right? When you go into when you look at it, think of a Soviet gulag, you should think of horrific or unsafe images like this, and that is not the Bureau of Prisons. Okay. And then on top of that, I just wonder if Soviet gulags had breast cancer screenings. I know the Bureau of Prisons does. So let's get into it. This this far left article is written by Elizabeth Wheel Greenberg in a scathing ruling. Scathing, man, they use that word way too much. Okay, way too much. Scathing, burned, blasts. It's like I'm reading a comic book when I'm reading far left headlines. Boom, blast, kapow, chow. Sorry, I'm back. In a scathing ruling, the federal judge lambasted the Bureau of Prisons for neglecting the medical needs of an incarcerated people, comparing federal lockups to Soviet gulag. Outside medical referrals are like Solstheim sick bay in the Soviet Gulag, a coveted but nearly inaccessible refuge for which only prisoners near death qualify for admission. Okay, U.S. District Judge Roy B. Dalton wrote in an order granting compassionate release to a woman in home confinement in Florida. Okay, that's what this is about. All right. So I want to talk about the medical needs of inmates and give you a personal story that happened. Okay. Okay. Saying that they're only going to take an inmate out that is near death. Let me tell you a personal story about this near death to qualify for admission. Now, number one, that's an interesting sentence when it comes to it. Okay. Um, Near death to qualify for admission. Okay. The Bureau of Prisons does not determine if they are admitted to an outside medical facility. They will determine if they can go and be evaluated by them. But that outside medical facility decides whether they are. So a lot of these headlines, what they do is they really just take the complainer's word for it. And inmates are always going to complain. They're always going to extremify everything that happens. This woman did get a compassionate release. So, but let me give you a personal story of an inmate and tell you what happened. So there was an inmate that scratched his hand on just like a loose piece of metal, okay, or something that was out, and uh, they were able to treat him and take care of him. It wasn't rusty or anything like that. They weren't worried about tetanus, but it was a scrape, and it was like right here on his finger. And it wasn't even really bleeding, but it was one of those ones. It looked like one of those deep paper cuts, when you get kind of a lip in your skin after it's done bleeding a little bit, right? And I don't know if I had the same wound at home. Now, don't get me wrong. I love overtime. If we're taking an inmate out to the hospital, if I'm taking an inmate to the hospital, and I've got the availability to do so, I'm totally fine doing this. So the inmate gets taken to medical, or walks up to medical to show him his scratched finger, and the medical professionals we had that day, and I'm not going to give an opinion on this, but the medical professionals that we had that day, with all their decades of schooling, um, said that inmate needed to go to the hospital. Now I want you to know something. Me working for the Bureau of Prisons, like, that's their job to determine that. I get that, and I had been in this job for over 10 years at this point, and I had gotten a very good sense as to when an inmate needed to go, was going to go out. So I get to a point where I private call the lieutenant or whoever's in charge on the radio, and I say, hey, this guy's going to look to go out. So the inmate, the lieutenant, private calls my radio while I respond to medical just to see what the heck's going on. And the lieutenant asks me, and we're speaking openly. It's a private channel; nobody else can hear us. And he goes, "So what's the deal with the inmate?" And I said, "It's just a scratch on the finger. So I'm probably going to be in medical for a little bit, but I'll take off, and they'll probably send him back to his housing unit." And all I know is 45 minutes later that we're being sent to the hospital. We get to the hospital. We get to the emergency room. We're there for 4 hours. Very happy to be paid for this. I'm very happy to be paid for this, folks. Okay. They put a Band-Aid on his finger and sent him home. No stitches, no steri strips. They cleaned it up. They put a legitimate, like, Band-Aid, just regular looking Band-Aid on his finger, sent us home. Probably cost the government a few $1,000. That was medical's decision. That's not on the Bureau. That's not on Bureau administration. That's on the medical staff that were working that night. So when you're saying near death qualified, the point that they're trying to say here, it's like, oh, they need to be near death before the Bureau of Prisons will send them somewhere else. Nope. We will send them out for a scratch on their finger and the BOP will pay thousands of dollars for them to get a Band-Aid. So we're already two paragraphs in riddled with inaccuracy. But let's see how many more that we can find. In 2021, the woman was sentenced to 8 years in prison. In 2025, the BOP moved her to home confinement. So she's home. On January 16, 2026, she filed a motion requesting compassionate release after a doctor found lumps in both breasts and blood discharged from her nipples, according to a judge's order. The doctor concluded that she was high risk for breast cancer and gave her an urgent referral to a breast surgeon in a letter submitted to the court. Her doctor wrote, evaluation by breast surgeon is medically necessary and urgent. Okay. We've seen that happen a lot. BOP has seen that happen a lot. However, the BOP waited weeks to schedule an appointment with a general surgeon, not a breast surgeon. Again, would love to know how they know that other than inmates saying this. Okay. The government opposed her request for compassionate release, telling the court that there does not to be any documented emergency. Okay. In a hearing held in February, the judge disagreed with the BOP's assessment, ordering the agency to bring her to see a breast surgeon by March 2027. To the surprise of no one, the BOP did not do what it was ordered to do. Again, I don't know the order. The BOP, as far as I know, always does what it's ordered to do when it comes to stuff like this. But you have to understand there is a huge medical facility inside every Bureau of Prisons facility that has multiple doctors, multiple nurse practitioners and specialists in it. There's a full working clinic inside of every BOP facility. So sometimes they have to go out for a specialist per se, but they have now here's the thing, as long as the BOP was granted access to these medical suggestions and release or whatever, however they communicated this, the BOP is going to take its best efforts. Why? Because they want to avoid lawsuits. They're going to do the extra medical stuff. That's why, again, they're willing to pay thousands of dollars for an inmate to get a Band-Aid. Okay? And peel my bail. I'm going to skip past that. Okay. In a statement to the appeal, the BOP said the agency does not comment on pending litigation or matters that are subject of legal proceedings, and that for privacy, safety, and security reasons, we do not discuss incarcerated individuals' condition confinement, specific release plans. Yeah. Plus, all that, most of that is public information. Unfortunately, as Dalton wrote in his ruling, hold on a second. As fortunately as Dalton wrote in his ruling, her experience is far from unique. Lawsuits and government investigations have detailed numerous instances of medical neglect in federal prisons. In 2023, David Blakeney, an incarcerated who was incarcerated at USP Canaan, is in Pennsylvania, died from a treatable, highly preventable ulcer, according to a complaint filed last year. At the time of his death, he was 32. Okay, listen, and I'm going to say this about every correctional agency, right? Okay, and the question is this, okay? I want really, if you're in the working public and you think that inmates are not being taken care of medically, all right? It would, if the same circumstance happened on the street, would the result be any different? Okay. Would they have gone to the doctor themselves? Now, every one of their families and people around them is going to say, yes, of course. Right. But again, I'm not a medical professional. I've had a couple friends die of literally ulcers. And one of them, neither of them knew that they had the ulcers ahead of time. Again, we're not getting a lot of detail on that situation, except that he died from a highly preventable ulcer. We don't know what was happening before then. So we get that lack of information. And this goes back to something I learned actually from another YouTuber named Lemino. He did a great video on the JFK assassination. I promise these are related. Is that when you leave a void of information, it gets filled with conspiracy and mystery, when really there's just a void of information that needs to be filled in with the actual information. They repeatedly pepper sprayed him, sent him to solitary confinement, punched and kicked him, and left him dehumanizing and painful restraint all of which exacerbated the ulcer and prevented him from getting the medical care that would have saved his life. Okay. Officers do not just randomly walk up to inmates and punch and kick them. There's usually 1 versus 128, as in one officer versus 128 inmates in any given housing unit. So an officer is not just going to walk up to an inmate and punch and kick. It's going to be one of two scenarios. Either it was a build up to that, and the officer had to defend himself or save a life, or the inmate was given a million chances to calm down, and then a team was put together, and then that team responded. Okay, officers do not do that. Okay, there's going to be some people in the comments that might disagree with that have never worked in a prison. So take their opinion as much as you want. Well, my buddy that was locked up said that officers would walk up every day and they'd pick somebody and they'd take them to the corner and beat them up in front of everybody just to show the other inmates who's boss. Really? Can you give me any names? Well, no. Okay, it didn't happen then. Can you tell me who said that to you? Well, no, then it didn't happen. Okay, it's just made up. It's an imagination. It's a hallucination. About 4 months later, Dalton granted Bardell's request and ordered his release. But Bardell's order was not over yet. The federal agency arranged for another prisoner to drop off Bardell at the airport. He was left at the curb without a wheelchair. By the time he arrived home in Florida, his clothes were soiled with excrement and blood. He died 9 days later from a metastatic colorectal cancer. So he got released, and he got released. Now, just to let you know, they put this in there. That is one normal practice at many correctional facilities. Is you have inmate drivers. You have inmates that are in there for much, much lower crimes where you can actually trust them to drive around the city, right? And they did check fraud, okay, which is there's but it's not violent, okay. They did check fraud. They're doing some time at the camp. They have no disciplinary history. They can get a job as what's called a city driver, where they can take inmates to their drop off locations and stuff like that. So the inmate. So I'm not looking into the story because again it's inflammatory. But he was left at the curb without his wheelchair. But he did arrive home. Okay, like okay, if you need medical care from the Bureau of Prisons, then you need to stay incarcerated. If you don't need medical care from the Bureau of Prisons, then you can get a compassionate release. You can take that. It really looks like this person needed medical care from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, but demanded a release. Well, I'm sorry. You have asked and received a release. After Bardell's death, Dalton held. Okay, so this is now the second case. So what we're seeing right now is a judge that really is looking for BOP in contempt of court for misleading. There's not been many times I've seen the same judge get cases in the multiple agencies. So this court is obviously looking and hunting. Okay. Dalton held the BOP in contempt of court for misleading him about the seriousness of Bardell's condition. Dalton requested the Department of Justice Office of OIG investigate the conditions of Bardell's confinement, as well as any misrepresentations. In January, about 5 months after his death, OIG released its report. Okay, so here's where we're going to go. I'm not even going to look at it yet. I haven't read it. I haven't read this article yet. Okay, so a judge requested an investigation from the investigating agency, and now we're apparently going to get the report. Let's see what the report says after the investigative agency that the judge asked to investigate this did so. Dalton had initially denied Bardell's petition based largely on the government's assurance that Bardell's condition had not been determined to be critical and he was receiving adequate care. According to the OIG report, however, this determination relied on the government's inaccurate representation of BOP's capabilities. The judge referenced the OIG report in his ruling, writing that the BOP delayed scheduling urgent medical appointments, leading to Bardell's death by treatable cancer. Okay. Treatable cancer. Okay. Again, how is the judge determining that? Right. Okay. We have to determine, is this guy, the BOP has to determine, is this guy, Is it a possibly fatal situation or is it treatable? And this judge is bouncing between both. It's either treatable right now or it's death. You need to pick one because if he was close to death, all right, then then he needed to stay in BOP care and get that medical care, right? If it's treatable and he wants to go home and get his treatment, you you immediately, that's it. You're not getting any more medical care. You're getting released. So honestly, it sounds like the inmate died because of the judge's order, right? And the inmate would probably still be alive today if the judge had not put him on the street. That's what it sounds like. When asked for comment on the OIG report, the BOP told the appeal in an email, matter has been carefully reviewed and is informing improvements regarding internal controls, interdisciplinary coordination, and the reduction in service process. It is the mission of the Bureau of Prisons to operate facilities that are safe, secure, and humane, the agency said. The BOP takes seriously its duty to protect the individuals entrusted to our custody as well as maintain safety of correctional staff in the community. And it does that. It does that. Like I remember working at the Bureau of Prisons and almost sometimes disagreeing with how much medical care they got personally. I have no problem saying that now. I've been in the job for a while because I'm just like, my family doesn't get afforded this type of medical care, but inmates are. But I get it. You have to avoid lawsuits. I get the big picture now. Okay. Elected officials and government agencies have repeatedly sounded the alarm about dangerously substandard medical care in federal lockups, which has been exacerbated by understaffed prisons. And I will agree with the understaffed prisons, Mark, but you drop, again, all these far left articles do the same thing. You had no problem dropping 3 or 4 names in every one of these. But then we get here, different elected officials and government agencies have repeatedly, well, why didn't you say what those are? According to a 2023 OIG report, 21% of correctional positions were unfilled. So now it's becoming about staffing. Okay. In an attempt to address the staffing crisis, the BOP has used nurses, cooks, teachers, and others as guards. Their officers. I don't know why it's so hard to just give them that, right? A practice known as augmentation. After reports, and again, listen, I'm highly BOP supportive. In case you can't tell when you watch these videos, love the Bureau of Prisons. Gave me a great options for my career. But augmentation needs to go away. Augmentation just needs to vanish. That is the biggest. The fact that you're not filling positions because you can just augment. Okay, that's the problem. Okay, if augmentation is no longer a solution, if it's no longer even an option, okay, it will force you to fill positions. And I'm sorry, BOP, but you're going to expect this and more about understaffing and augmentation to come out, more and more details, and more than likely details you don't want to come out, as long as you keep augmenting and not hiring. Okay. Now, someone might say we're augmenting and doing both. Someone from BOP went, we're augmenting and we're doing both. And that's not necessarily true. You're not hiring to the degree and ability that you can if you're still allowed to augment. Okay. And you're not going to be able to fully staff as long as you can push that augmentation button. Okay. There's probably a way to phase that in where, you know, maybe you have push one augmentation button a day until you're starting to get your staffing levels, but that should only last a few months, right? If you're really focused on hiring and finding good quality people to work at the Bureau of Prisons. Earlier this year, 4 Democratic members of Congress sent a letter to the BOP director under staffing crisis. They didn't even write. They probably didn't even read it. Okay, and I'd say that about any senator, not just left or right. About the understaffing crisis, writing that has further restricted the availability of medical and mental health care without a sufficient number of staff. Many prisons rely on lockdowns that disrupt scheduled medical treatment and impede timely response to medical and psychiatric emergencies. All right. I'm just going to highlight that one word. In one word, can you tell me who gave the BOP $700 million less in budget this year? I'll ask it again. What facet of our government decided that the Bureau of Prisons needed $700 million less to operate this month while also having this opinion? Congress. Congress approved a budget that was $700 million less for the Bureau of Prisons. Congress, if you want them to hire quality staff, you got to give them the money and stop giving it to agencies that don't have an incarcerated population. IRS doesn't have an incarcerated population. Homeland Security doesn't have a, a population. Parks and Rec or whatever version of that is federal doesn't have an incarcerated population. Okay, only different facets of the DOJ have an incarcerated population, with the exception of Bureau of Indian Affairs, which also runs its own facilities. So you can't give them less money and then complain that they're not hiring people because they don't have the money to do it. Sorry, Congress. It's the truth. The lawmakers wrote that they learned of one man who had a heart attack and had to wait an hour for help because of understaffing. In another case, a person's dental appointment was rescheduled 14 times. The delays led to a more serious medical issues that could have been avoided had appropriate treatment been provided when originally scheduled. And I love how all the blame on the rescheduling is always going to the Bureau of Prisons. Have you noticed it's never been put on the inmate? Like if an inmate, commits a crime in prison or gets locked up in prison, goes to a special housing unit, more than likely his appointments and all that are going to change. Also, there's plenty of, I mean, it's not like you just walk into the, like a dental appointment and you sit there in the lobby with the inmate and he's just in between all the kids there for their kid teeth exams. Most of the time they have to shut down for an entire day or at least part of their day so we can bring in a secure inmate through a secret entrance or something like that, or they do. In Dalton's ruling, he bemoaned the BOP's refusal to change, which is just absolutely ridiculous. The BOP is one of the most ever-changing agencies, so scrutinized, always changing. Nothing seems to move the nation's federal prison system operators to improve their response to urgent medical needs of federal prison. Court orders go unread or ignored. OIG reports are dismissed. Recommendations are unheeded. Sanctions brook no change. Completely false statement. All right, folks. So this article right here, I mean, it's just false. That's what this is. This is not an article that would be considered news. This is an inflammatory opinion piece. It's all it is. It should not be taken seriously. And then you see an article like this come out from an unregulated, far left leaning website, and then it gets quoted a lot because, oh, there's articles on this, and then the next one, oh, there's multiple articles on this, and they're all quoting the same just inflammatory article that just threw out really a bunch of cherry pick complaints with no substance, right? That's what this is. That's the appeal right there. Articles like this I find hilarious. They are truly funny. And I want you to think about it. Remember what the headline was? Soviet compares Federal Bureau of Prisons to Soviet Gulag. At any point when I was reading that article, did you think of a Soviet Gulag? Did you picture one? So that's that was a funny article. That's a funny article. I mean, somebody that thinks it's not funny will get in the comments. But if you got something out of that, I appreciate it. If you're hearing my voice still, if you have any TSP questions, you know who to call. That's me. My phone number will flash on screen at the end of the video. Make sure you like and subscribe. That really helps me out. It really does when you like and subscribe. And you want to know something? Listen, I see some of these videos. I see who's watching them. I see the interactions. That's awesome. Don't be afraid to hit like and subscribe. Don't worry about that. Would love some comments. And by the way, also, if you come across an article that I might miss or an article you want me to cover, put it in the comments below too. I appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next one.